My name is Ben Johnson. I'm the owner and chocolatier behind Blue Table Chocolates. We're coming at you from our 5 Points commercial kitchen. So let me just throw out a very brief warning that my neighbor has threatened to streak our windows. So if I break focus, it's only because of him. Don't take it personally. Yeah. This is the fun part of the job. Most of what I do is cloister myself in a windowless 500 square foot kitchen, turn on old punk music, and just work late into the night. So it's a bit of a treat to actually get to enjoy the creative community in Buffalo. I've been going through some of the old videos with Creative Mornings, and it's just it's something that we had talked about in our family before, of trying to be a member of a society of mutual admiration. It's an old term, came across years ago. It basically means to respect people that do things wildly different than what you do. So through Creative Mornings, I'm finding poets, I'm finding artists, I'm finding printmakers, I'm finding people that I never would have come in contact with, especially during COVID, and especially given that by disposition, I'm a hermit in a windowless box. So thank you for that. It's been a privilege, and I'm more than a little honored to be invited to take part in this. So let me give you a little background. I'm a chocolatier, which is different than a chocolate maker. There's a bit of a distinction between those two, and it's worth noting because this is going to come up later today. Chocolate makers are the people that take the cocoa beans and they transform them into chocolate. Now, the metric of success for a chocolate maker is really fidelity. It's how true to the bean you can be, how much of the terroir you can actually bring out, and remove any essence of yourself from the process so that just the bean comes through. The best chocolate makers come up with the most subtle, the most involved notes in their chocolate bars. Chocolatiers play by different rules. We start with at least hopefully decent materials, and then the name of the game is really what can you bring to it yourself? What can you add to the mix? The closest analogy that we've used before is the difference between a winemaker and a beer maker. Winemakers are trying to actually tease out what the nature of the grape is, and beer makers are adding apricots and lemon peel and cardamom. So we're beer makers here. My background is in architecture. Went to University of Virginia for undergrad degree, and most of what I do comes from the trauma of going through A school. For those of you that haven't done it, brief explanation of what they do to you in architecture school. They break you down like you're going to Parris Island in the Marine Corps. My personal record is working for 76 hours straight without sleep. They go through what's known as a critique process, in which after, say, 3 months of studio work, you need to stand up and defend yourself in front of professors, peers, strangers, visiting professionals. And for an hour, you're standing in public defending every decision that you've ever made. The measure of whether or not you're a good critic is how much you can tear that person down and challenge everything they say. So after that process, we all, after graduating, have this little voice, this evil Jiminy Cricket in the back of our heads that is questioning everything you do, every decision you make, which is healthy in that you need to be able to justify everything. Even small decisions, you can't simply say, I felt like it, or it seemed like a good idea at the time. There has to be some grounding reason behind it. So with that in mind, we're talking about spectrum today, which is a beautifully wide open topic. A couple of different ways we can go about this, and there goes my neighbor. He wanted to put some framework around this topic just to give it some organization. There are 3 things that we're really looking at when we talk about the creative process, and hopefully the finished product is belonging within a spectrum. Comes down to boundaries, moments within the spectrum, and then finally we'll talk about whether or not your intentions are coming through. And I'll sprinkle some of this with some personal anecdotes. I'm sure, especially given how creative the audience is here, Everybody has different approaches to the same thing. I'm not saying that this is what you should do. This is the process that I stumbled on, and it seems to work for me. Generally speaking, though, if you're unaware, these are what we make. They're small chocolate truffles. They're thin chocolate shells with different ganache centers, sometimes marshmallows, sometimes nut pastes. But the medium that we're working in kind of defines the boundaries of what we're looking to do. So a couple notes about chocolate to start. And it's worth mentioning a side little anecdote that relates to this. It's difficult to talk about chocolate without actually giving you samples to eat. There's a famous story about an American ballet dancer, Isadora Duncan, that created a new dance, and she performed in Russia, and it came to wild acclaim. And a reporter came up to her and said, "That was amazing. I've never seen anything like that. Can you tell me what it meant?" And her response is, "Well, if I could tell you what it meant, I wouldn't have had to do the damn dance." So there's some things that don't translate very well to talking about them. So when this is all done, whenever you get a chance, all of you are welcome to come by the shop and get a free sample, get a better sense of what we're talking about. So that is an open invitation to all of you guys. Chocolate is the most denatured of foods. And by that, I mean, when you think about a meal, let's say you go to a 5-star restaurant and you order a chicken, you want the chicken to look like a chicken. You don't want a chicken mousse. You don't want chicken foam, or maybe you don't. I certainly don't. It has to have some relationship to your expectations of what a chicken is supposed to be. When you get to the dessert course, there is no birthday cake tree. There is no chocolate mousse plant that you can refer to. It's supposed to be something that doesn't exist in nature. And when you get to within the world of desserts, chocolate is by far the most denatured. So due to the nature of cocoa butter, which is what makes chocolate, it is polymorphically perverse. We're going to geek out here. I hope you guys don't mind. We're doing a deep dive into the science today. Okay. So cocoa butter is polymorphically perverse, which means it forms different structures of crystals under different conditions. It's kind of like carbon in that under certain conditions, carbon can turn into a lump of coal, or it could turn into a diamond depending on heat, temperature, time, pressure, and so on and so forth. Cocoa butter can form 6 different types of crystals, one of which is the one that we're looking for. It's called bringing it into temper. It's got longer shelf life. It's got a certain shine to it. And it's got this beautiful snap when you crack it. So part of the technique of the craft is actually making sure that everything you do is working with the right crystals. Now, when you get the right kind of crystals, chocolate can take any shape, can take any form. So you're really limitless in that part. On top of which cocoa butter is itself, when you extract it from the bean, odorless and tasteless. So you can add food-soluble colors to it, and it can now take on any color. So we're working with something that can be in any shape, as long as you respect physics, and any color. And then lastly, the thing that people refer to when they talk about dark chocolate being heart healthy is a class of phytochemicals, specifically called flavonols. When people speak about red wine having heart-healthy properties, these phytochemicals, it's a compound that's not exactly a nutrient, but it's got antioxidant properties. The more and varied flavonols in the process or in the product, the better for your heart it is. Now, the flavonols are typically associated with different types of flavors, so you'll get some cheesy flavonols, some nutty, some floral. And a good, decent, well-crafted red wine could have between 300 to 500 different types of flavonols. Cocoa beans, when handled properly, can have up to 1,200. So, yay, chocolate. What that means is, because there are all these different flavor notes involved with chocolate, you can really pair it with almost anything if you do it right. There aren't too many foods that you can pair with coffee and mint. Banana, peanut butter, orange juice, all of these things, when done right, work with chocolate. So we're really not bound too much by that. So we've got this wide open field to play with, which means the first thing we have to do, we have to set some boundaries. So we're going to start with the spectrum that we pick out of midair. And there are a bunch of chocolatiers out there that make different decisions. It's fine. It's what they do. So you've got chocolatiers that are just nothing but vegan. So that's the boundary they set. There's a famous chocolatier in England that only works with water-based ganaches. There's a chocolatier that works out of Singapore that does art installations, entire rooms covered in chocolate, where visitors are intended to actually pluck things off the walls. Her name is Janice Wong. She does amazing work if you ever get a chance. What we wanted to do, though, is limit ourselves a couple of different ways. So we're setting our spectrum boundaries the following way. Start with the law of diminishing returns. The thought is that the first bite of anything is always going to be better than the second bite, and the third and the fifth. So if that's true, why not just serve a whole bunch of first bites? So these pieces here are intended to be just single bites, single moments. So we're working within the confines of small, discrete moments only. We're also working within a limitation of shape. So we've got a number of different types of chocolate molds because it could take on any shape that you give it. So we wanted to do just a single half dome. And the reason for that is mostly because we didn't want the value add to be someone else's design. We didn't want it to be the function of a manufacturer in China that is coming up with an interesting shape. We wanted it to be something that we add. So we started with something fundamentally basic that gives us a nice canvas on which to add something to. So just the single rounded shape, we can add different flavor, colors, techniques, so on and so forth. We're also working with cocoa butter, which is in itself a fluid medium. So we're trying to respect the fluid nature of it. We're not trying to use it in a way that it doesn't want to be used. So we're within that. Let me see. What else we have? The last thing that I wanted to do, no, those are pretty much the boundaries. So when we're talking about a spectrum, everybody's first thought, I'm assuming, is going to be a color wheel or some variation in which there's no particular value between different points within the spectrum. Someone has to set boundaries because obviously when we talk about color wheel, we're not talking about ultraviolet light, we're not talking about infrared. So we have to set boundaries. But within those boundaries, there's really an infinite number of possibilities. So the next step is we have to pick moments within that spectrum. And the idea there is to describe the meaning of the spectrum with what points you decide to pull out. So when you're looking at the color wheel, no one would reasonably say that this color is better than that color, this color is stronger than that color. It's intended to be value neutral. It's part of the reason why when you speak about someone on, say, the autism spectrum, the idea there is to make explicit that one point on the spectrum is not necessarily better than another. It's supposed to be value neutral. So then how do you make a choice? How do you decide what moments you really want to focus on? By nature, my inclination has been to really explore the boundaries of the spectrum, but this is still a business. We still have to do something that is commercially viable and that other people will enjoy, so can't push the boundaries all the time. There needs to be some recognition of things that are a little bit more in the center as well as some on the outside. We had a lot of fun doing a red miso paste caramel. We did a cilantro and tangerine truffle. We experimented a lot, some of which were not at all successful. They tasted great, but I couldn't sell them. But we got to the point where for April Fools, actually put out what I thought was a ridiculous joke of a buffalo-based fried egg fish fry truffle with a nice tartar sauce ganache until people started to buy it. It's like, no, please don't eat that. That is just a bad joke. So within the realm of our boundaries, there are people out there that are willing to explore the further reaches. But for our 2020 lineup, we still want to just have different points within just to show the range within our chosen boundaries. So we're doing that partly with color. We're doing that partly with flavors. So we want to make sure that there's some citrus, there's some nut, there's some caramel, there's something more sweet, something more spicy. Wanted to do it with textures as well. So we have some marshmallows, we have some nut paste, we have some crunchy inclusions, some curd ganaches, some water ganaches, some fruit ganaches, and so on and so forth. But the idea there was really just to show how wide and varied the possibilities could be within our chosen boundaries. Now, what we do is start with our standard 12, and that sort of sets the baseline. And then every month we roll out 2 new flavors, just to keep highlighting different parts of the quote-unquote wheel that we're looking to explore, and really kind of drive home the idea that it's much more varied and rich of possibilities than you would typically think. When I grew up, I'm assuming this is true for a lot of people, chocolate meant a Twix, a Reese's peanut butter cup, which is fine. I mean, when we're walking down Elmwood, our kids want a chocolate lollipop, and that's what they get. That's fine. What we're trying to do, though, is expand the sense of familiarity, at least in Buffalo, if, not Eastern Seaboard, with what people might not be familiar with. If we're trying to be a viable business, what we want to do is offer something that you can't make at home, or something that you might not have seen elsewhere. So that's hopefully the value add that we're bringing to it. So we've made a couple choices, and you're certainly welcome to check out the website or swing by and try some out. What you need to do, though, is when that's all said and done, is step back and actually look at the totality of choices that you've made and see what they add up to. And it's not so much whether or not you've been true to the goal of variety and not repeating yourself and not plagiarizing yourself from earlier years, but the real joy of this is, especially during COVID, oh my God, this has been amazing during COVID and so healthy and necessary, to completely lose sense of yourself and just set aside whether or not schools are going to open, whether or not your family's okay, whether or not this is ever going to end, and just go into a windowless room, turn on the Ramones, and just disappear into work for what feels like 2 hours turns into 8. And your hands take on their own life, and you just find yourself energized at the end of this. It's the weirdest thing, and perhaps this is something to do with architecture school and insomnia, but to go home at 2 o'clock in the morning and just be wildly energized because you didn't exist. You erased yourself and from the world, and it's this wonderful, beautiful thing. But when you come back to yourself, when you come back to the world and you see what you've done, it's worth taking a moment to see if there's any patterns that you weren't aware of when you were working, anything that you might learn from either the finished product or about yourself that just kind of came out of its own, that you didn't direct, that you didn't choose. And that's kind of what we wanted to do at the end of this process, is that after setting our boundaries and after choosing our moments within the boundaries, is to put it aside, take a break, step back and say, what does it mean now? What have we done? And it's been a continuous process of doing this over and over and over again and learning from what you've done and finding out some of what you didn't know about yourself in the choices that you make, and whether or not your intentions are really coming through, or if what you ended up doing is not actually what you started out doing. Not to get too esoteric about this, but it's really almost a religious experience to learn about yourself and learn about the nature of the product once you step back from it. And then you take a beat, you catch some sleep, you do it all over again. And you do it again and again and again. And in the process of doing it, you learn a lot more about the business, about the nature of chocolate as a medium, about the flavors that you're trying to highlight, and all of that. And please stop by and please eat lots and lots of chocolate.